Wind howled through Duluth. His breath clouded in the bitter air, fading fast. Down the street, a German Shepherd K9 named Rex stopped in his tracks, ears pricked. He heard what no one else can. The desperate call of a child abandoned by the one who should have protected him. Moments later, boots pound against the ice as Officer Mark Halloway races into the storm. The boy's life now hangs between rope and rescue, fear and faith. Duluth, Minnesota was locked under a hard winter night. Wind came off Lake Superior in blunt, steady pushes, shoving snow down the narrow streets. Street lights threw short cones of yellow. Everything else was white, moving, and loud. At the far end of a block, a metal-skinned garage rattled in the gusts. A small boy stood at its doorway, wrists tied with nylon rope to the cold iron frame. His name was Ethan Miller, 6 years old, slight with pale blonde hair and washed winter blue eyes. He wore a thin navy sweatshirt and sweatpants. His socks had soaked through and hardened inside canvas sneakers. The rope had left red grooves above both wrists. He pressed his cheek to his shoulder to shield from the wind and tried to call out. Inside the house behind him, Arthur Miller, 38, narrow-shouldered and hollow-cheeked, lay in a recliner with a half-empty bottle. His eyes had the dull flicker of someone who drank to keep thoughts quiet. He tied his son to the doorframe after a clumsy spill, and an argument that tipped into shouting. He told himself it was to teach a lesson. Then he sat down and drank until the lesson became the only thing left standing. A few blocks away, a Duluth PD K9 unit moved carefully through the whiteout. Officer Mark Halloway drove with both hands on the wheel. He was 41, tall and rangy under a zippered winter jacket. His face was square and wind-cut. A thin scar traced his left cheek from a years-old rescue call. Before joining the department, he had been a Coast Guard rescue swimmer on this same lake. Since then, he kept his voice even, his movements efficient, and his promises few. In the rear kennel, his partner lay alert and quiet. Rex was a 5-year-old German Shepherd, sable-backed and long-legged, built to run and climb. His ears were high and active. His eyes were amber and steady. On duty, he saved his bark for when it mattered. Then Rex lifted his head. The movement was clean and decisive. He stood, braced, and pressed his nose to the kennel gate, breathing in quick, short pulls. He turned his head toward the passenger side window and froze there, ears speared forward. Mark glanced up into the mirror. "What do you have?" Under the wind came a sound that did not belong to the storm. A high hoarse call, the kind a kid makes when courage runs out. Mark signaled a turn and eased into the side street. He cracked the rear latch. Rex was out in one clean burst. Mark followed with a flashlight, his boots sinking where drifts had filled the gaps between shrubs. Rex crossed a hedge, cut left, and threaded a narrow side yard. Mark took the chain-link fence and dropped into a yard where a detached garage leaned toward the alley. The flashlight swept once. The beam found the door frame and the boy tied there. "Hey," he said as he moved in, tone level. "I've got you." Rex set himself at a slight angle between the yard and the boy, ears high and head tipped. Up close, Ethan's skin looked raw where the rope had ridden. His lips were white at the center. His jaw trembled quick and uneven. "Cold," Ethan whispered. Mark wedged the flashlight high under his arm and worked the knots with gloved fingers. "Name?" "Ethan." "Okay, Ethan. I'm Mark. This is Rex. We're here now." The last hitch gave. The rope slid off and fell. Mark caught him under the arms and turned him gently. He peeled off his patrol jacket in one practiced move and wrapped it around the boy, collar up over ears. "You're okay. We're going to the truck." Rex stepped in close and put his shoulder where a wall should have been. He stood, radiating heat, eyes still on the yard. Mark lifted Ethan and set off the way they had come. Rex backed with them, then pivoted and took point at the curb. The SUV glowed in the storm like a small room. Mark opened the rear passenger door, set Ethan on the seat, and pulled the jacket tighter around him. He slid a rolled thermal blanket from under the seat and tucked it over the boy's legs and shoulders. Rex jumped into his kennel, turned once, and lay facing forward, ears high. Mark climbed in, shut the door, and let the silence of the cab hold for a second. "We're going to the station," Mark said. "It's warm and quiet there. We've got hot chocolate." A small ghost of a smile twitched at one corner of Ethan's mouth and held. He nodded. The drive back was slow, the storm pressing hard against the windshield. Mark kept his eyes on the road, but checked the mirror often. He had seen hypothermia take hold before. He spoke now and then. "Still with me, buddy?" A weak nod came from the back seat. "I'm here." Rex shifted in his kennel, ears pricked, head angled toward the boy. The precinct sat in a squat brick building near the harbor. Inside, heat carried the faint smell of coffee and paper. At the front desk sat Sergeant Tom Willis, a veteran officer in his 50s, thick-set with a gray beard. "Cold one to be out in," Willis said, rising from his chair. "What's his story?" "Found tied up outside a house on 7th, Mark replied. "Name's Ethan Miller. He's freezing but conscious." Willis frowned. "That Miller place figures." He leaned down so the boy could see his face. "You're safe now, kid." Mark carried Ethan to the break room where the light was softer. He set the boy in a chair, wrapped the blanket tighter, and slid a steaming mug across the table. Ethan's small hands shook as he tried to grip it, so Mark steadied the cup. A few minutes later, Dr. Claire Whitman stepped in. She was in her mid-30s, tall and slim, with auburn hair pulled back. She knelt beside Ethan. "Hi, Ethan. I'm Claire. I'm going to check you over. Make sure you're warm and healthy. That all right?" Ethan nodded. Claire worked gently, examining the red marks on his wrists, the pale skin of his hands. "He'll be fine once he's warm and rested," she told Mark. "No frostbite, just cold and scared. But he needs somewhere safe tonight and maybe longer." The precinct quieted after midnight. Ethan slept curled under two blankets on a narrow cot. Rex lay a few feet away, head on his paws, but eyes half open. Mark sat at a desk nearby, filling in the incident report. Claire returned. "He'll sleep through the night now, but he's fragile, Mark. He's used to fear." Mark leaned back. "I know." Before Mark could answer, small feet shuffled on the linoleum. Ethan had stirred, rubbing his eyes. He clutched the blanket around his shoulders and walked toward them. "Sorry," he whispered. "I had a bad dream." Claire knelt to meet his eyes. "It's all right. You're safe here." She guided him to a chair and poured another small cup of cocoa. After a long pause, he said, "There's something I should tell you." Mark leaned forward. "Go ahead, son." "My dad, he made me keep a box. Said I couldn't open it. He yelled if I even touched the lock. He hid it in the basement behind the shelves." Mark and Claire exchanged a look. "What kind of box?" "It was small, metal with a black lock on it. He said people would come for it if I ever lost it." Ethan's hands tightened around the cup. "I didn't want to keep it, but he said I had to." Mark's mind ran quick calculations. A locked metal box hidden, guarded by threats. It fit too neatly with the rumors he'd heard about Coleman Briggs, the local hustler who had been pushing contraband through Duluth's back streets. Before Mark could dig further, the front door opened. Deputy Kyle Jensen stepped in. He was 28, broad through the shoulders with a short brown beard. He carried a folder tucked under his arm. "Sorry to break the quiet, but dispatch got a tip. A neighbor near the Miller place reported seeing a black pickup circling the block after you brought the boy in." Mark's jaw tightened. "Anyone get a plate?" Kyle shook his head. "Storm covered it, but it could be Briggs's crew. Ethan's head snapped up at the name, fear flashing across his face. They came before. Big men. Dad said not to talk to them. Mark rose from the desk. If Briggs is sniffing around, that box matters more than I thought. We'll need to check the Miller house before they do. Willis entered just then. You'll need a warrant. But I can call the judge. As the sergeant headed to the phone, Kyle shifted uneasily. Should I run patrol past the neighborhood tonight? Mark studied him. Yes, take another unit with you. If that truck comes back, I want it tailed. Rex had risen quietly during all this, padding toward Ethan. The shepherd lowered his head so the boy could touch the top of his fur. Ethan's hand trembled, but he managed to run his fingers over the warm coat. Rex leaned into the touch, patient. For the first time, Ethan managed a faint smile. Mark noticed and allowed himself a brief flicker of relief. We'll get that box, and we'll keep him safe. The storm eased by morning, leaving Duluth hushed beneath a heavy quilt of white. The Miller house sat at the end of a block, still half buried. Officer Mark Halloway stood by the patrol SUV, eyes scanning the yard. Rex padded beside him, nose working the frozen air. Sergeant Willis arrived first, stepping out of his sedan. He carried the signed warrant folded in a leather folder. Judge signed off, Willis said. Mark nodded and turned as another vehicle pulled in. Deputy Kyle Jensen climbed out. Mark gave him a brisk nod. You cover the back with Rex. If anyone shows, you don't play hero. Call it in. Inside, the house smelled of stale liquor and old dust. Mark moved with steady steps, flashlight cutting arcs across the clutter. He paused at the basement door. The basement air was sharper, carrying the damp bite of concrete and rust. Shelves lined the walls. Mark swept his light across each one, then froze when it glinted off something tucked behind a wooden crate. He stepped closer and pulled out a small metal box. It was gray, edges dented with a black padlock clamped tight. He crouched and set it on a workbench. Willis joined him. That it? Mark gave a short nod. Matches what the boy described. A sudden bark cut the silence upstairs. Rex's voice was sharp and urgent. Mark bolted up the stairs with Willis right behind him. In the kitchen, Kyle stood near the back door, his service weapon drawn, but steady. Outside, tire tracks scarred the fresh snow. Truck pulled up, slowed like they were checking the place. Rex caught it first. They peeled off when I came to the door. Mark's gaze dropped to the paw prints by the door frame. Rex had pressed close, ready to spring. Mark laid a hand on his back, feeling the tension there. Briggs, Willis muttered. He knows we're sniffing. Mark carried the box out to the SUV, locking it into the evidence compartment. Back at the precinct, the box was opened under proper procedure. Inside lay bundles of cash wrapped with rubber bands, a stack of ID cards with different names but the same faces and a small handgun. At the bottom sat a thumb drive. Willis whistled low. That's not a drunk stash. That's organized. Mark turned the thumb drive over in his gloved hand. Briggs is running more than liquor. This ties Arthur right in the middle of it. When Claire arrived to check on Ethan later that afternoon, Mark stepped into the hallway with her. You found it, didn't you? She asked quietly. Mark gave a single nod. It's worse than I thought. But it also means we have leverage. We can protect Ethan if we move fast enough. By late afternoon, the streets of Duluth were clearing. Inside the community clinic, Mark guided Ethan through the lobby, one steady hand on the boy's shoulder. Rex moved just ahead of them, nails clicking on the tile. Claire Whitman was already waiting in one of the exam rooms. There you are, she said softly. Come on, we'll make this quick. Ethan climbed onto the exam table. Claire moved with calm efficiency, checking his pulse, listening to his breathing. A knock broke the quiet. Nurse Ellen Carver stepped in. "We're backed up with walk-ins," she said with a tired smile, then softened when her eyes landed on Ethan. "Poor thing, looks like he's been through a war." "He has," Mark said simply. The calm lasted only minutes. Rex stiffened first, his ears angling toward the corridor, his body tensed, a growl rumbling low in his chest. Mark straightened instantly, one hand moving to rest near his holster. The door pushed open and a man stepped inside. He wasn't dressed like a patient or staff. He wore a heavy wool coat dusted with snow. Beneath it, his angular jaw was covered in stubble, and a faint scar crossed the bridge of his nose. His eyes, a piercing gray, scanned the room with the sharpness of someone who weighed threats by instinct. This was Coleman Briggs. In person, he was larger, his frame broad through the shoulders. "Well," Briggs said, voice low and rough like gravel, "looks like you found our little runaway." His eyes slid to Ethan, and the boy shrank back. Mark stepped forward, placing himself between Briggs and the child. "This clinic is private property. You don't belong here." Briggs's mouth curved. "Everything in this town belongs to someone, officer, and you've been poking into things you don't understand." His gaze flicked to Rex, who stood bristled, hackles raised. Claire's voice cut through. "You need to leave now. This boy is under care." Mark's stance hardened. "If you're thinking of reaching for something, don't. Not here. Not with him watching." He nodded toward Rex. A voice came from the hall. "Everything all right in here?" It was Deputy Kyle Jensen stepping into view. His hand hovered near his sidearm. Briggs's eyes narrowed, calculating. 2 officers, a dog, and witnesses. With a slow, deliberate motion, he withdrew his empty hand from his coat, palms open. "No trouble, just checking in on a family friend." He gave Ethan one last lingering look that made the boy shudder, then turned on his heel and walked out. The room exhaled at once. Rex eased but didn't lie down. Ethan clung to the blanket around his shoulders, eyes wide. Mark placed a reassuring hand on the boy's shoulder. "He's gone. You're safe." Night fell early over Duluth. At the precinct, Mark sat hunched at his desk. The thumb drive from the Miller basement plugged into his laptop. Beside him, Rex lay with his head on his paws. The files loaded slowly. Spreadsheets, transaction records, coded lists. Mark's eyes narrowed at names that repeated. His jaw flexed. Briggs's operation wasn't a handful of thugs. It was a network. Kyle Jensen stepped inside with 2 mugs of coffee. He set one on the desk. "Figured you'd need it." Before Mark could respond, Sergeant Willis appeared. He looked grim. "We got something." Sheriff's office picked up chatter. "Briggs has Arthur Miller. They're holding him at an abandoned warehouse by the rail yard." The 3 men drove through the storm in silence. The rail yard loomed like a skeleton of the town's past. Willis parked a block away, killing the lights. They stepped out into the biting cold. Rex leapt down beside Mark. They moved cautiously toward the warehouse. The building's corrugated metal walls sagged with rust. Rex froze, ears pricked, and gave a low growl. A figure stood near the back door. Mark signaled Rex forward. The shepherd flowed through the snow with a hunter's grace. As they closed in, the figure glanced up, startled, but too late. Mark pressed him against the wall. Inside, the warehouse reeked of oil and damp wood. Lanterns burned on crates. And there, against a support beam, Arthur Miller sat tied to a chair, wrists bound, head slumped forward. His hair was disheveled, streaked with gray. When he raised his eyes, there was a flicker of recognition and shame. "You shouldn't have brought him into this," Mark said quietly. Arthur's voice was scraped raw. "I didn't have a choice. They wanted the box. Said if I didn't pay, they'd come for the boy. I thought I could handle it, but Briggs, he's worse than you know. Willis and Kyle moved to cover the entrances. Rex padded forward, nose brushing Arthur's hand. The man flinched, then stilled. Before Mark could cut the ropes, the distant crunch of boots echoed from outside. Briggs's men were coming back. Mark's chest tightened. He cut the ropes fast, dragging Arthur to his feet. Move, he ordered. They slipped through the side, Rex close. Shouts rang out, angry and sharp. Kyle fired a warning shot into the sky. They piled Arthur into the SUV, Rex leaping in beside him. Willis climbed behind the wheel and hit the gas. Gunfire popped faintly behind them. Snow swallowed the echoes. Back at the precinct, Arthur slumped on a bench. Ethan slept still in the break room. Mark leaned against the wall. You'll answer for what you've done, Mark said. But your boy, he still wants you. You think about that. Arthur lowered his gaze, but for the first time that night, he gave a slow nod. Rex settled at Mark's side, guarding both with the same unwavering loyalty. The blizzard returned with fury that night. Snow swirled across Duluth in relentless sheets. Yet in the precinct, a storm of another kind gathered. Ethan slept in the break room, curled on the cot. Rex lay beside the cot, amber eyes open. Mark Halloway stood in the office across the hall, staring at the evidence board. Arthur Miller sat at a corner desk under guard. Sergeant Willis stood near the main entrance. Beside him, Kyle Jensen moved nervously from window to window. The storm outside masked the first hint of danger. It was Rex who caught it. The faint crunch of boots against ice. His ears twitched, his body stiffened, and a growl rose from his chest. Mark reacted instantly. Then came the knock, slow, deliberate, on the back entrance. 3 knocks spaced evenly. The room froze. Before Willis reached the door, glass shattered near the side hall. A figure in dark clothing crashed through, snow and wind exploding into the corridor. Briggs's men had come, shadows poured through the broken side window. Boots stomping across tile. Mark drew his weapon, barking orders. The crack of gunfire echoing. Willis's shotgun roared once. Kyle ducked low, returning fire. In the break room, Ethan bolted upright. He froze only a second before Rex leapt over him, barking with trained instinct. The shepherd lunged at the door just as a masked intruder shoved it open. Rex clamped down on his arm. The gun clattered against the floor, and Ethan screamed, backing into the corner. Mark sprinted into the hall, pivoting just in time to see Briggs himself step through the chaos. His broad shoulders filled the doorway. His gray eyes burned with rage. "Where's the boy?" His voice thundered above the gunfire. Mark raised his pistol. "You're not touching him." The 2 men locked eyes. Arthur staggered into the hall, pale and trembling. He looked at Briggs, then at his son's terrified shadow behind Rex's frame. Something shifted in him. "Enough." Arthur's voice cracked through the noise. He stepped forward. "You want someone? You take me, not him." Briggs's lip curled in disdain. "You think you get to bargain?" He jerked his head and one of his men raised a weapon toward Arthur, but Rex moved faster. The shepherd tore down the hall, launching into the man's chest. The rifle spun away, the hallway erupted again. Shouts, the thud of bodies, the whistle of bullets. Mark pressed forward, firing twice. Willis stormed from the front, shotgun booming. Kyle held his ground better now. And then it was just Briggs left, standing at the far end, breathing hard, eyes feral. For a heartbeat, he considered charging forward. But something in Rex's bared teeth, in Mark's unwavering aim, and in Arthur's ragged but unbroken stance, made even Briggs pause. He spat into the snow pooling under the shattered window, then retreated. "This isn't over," he snarled before vanishing back into the storm. Silence returned in uneven gasps. Mark lowered his pistol slowly. Willis wiped sweat from his brow. Kyle leaned against the wall, panting. In the break room, Ethan still huddled in the corner, trembling. Arthur dropped to his knees, tears freezing on his lashes. "I'm sorry, son," he whispered. "I should have protected you, but I will now. I swear it." Rex patted back, sides heaving. He leaned into Ethan, pressing his weight against the boy's legs. Ethan buried his hands in the dog's thick coat, clinging. Mark watched from the doorway. The precinct was battered, but standing. Briggs had been pushed back. And in that fragile silence, something new had been born. A father's awakening, a boy's flicker of hope, and the steady heartbeat of a dog who refused to yield. The storm broke at last. Morning came soft and pale. Sunlight spilling across Duluth in golden shards. The city was quiet, subdued. At the precinct, the shattered windows were boarded with plywood. Mark Halloway sat at his desk. In front of him lay the final reports. Briggs's captured men, the evidence from the metal box. Briggs himself had vanished, but his operation had cracked. Sergeant Willis leaned against the doorframe. "Sheriff says Briggs's crew won't hold out long." "You did good, Halloway." "And the kid?" Ethan sat at the table there, eating slowly. Beside him, Rex lay sprawled across the linoleum, ears relaxed. Ethan's hand rested on the dog's flank as he ate. Arthur Miller stood across the room. He looked worn down, but there was something different now. "I can't change what I did," Arthur said finally. "But I'm done running, done drinking, done letting men like Briggs own me. If I've got years in prison ahead, I'll take them, but I'll use them to be the man you deserved." Ethan's fork stilled. He looked at his father. Slowly, he whispered, "I just wanted you to be there." Rex nudged his knee with a wet nose, grounding him again. Claire Whitman entered then, carrying paperwork. She knelt beside Ethan. "Child Services will make arrangements. For now, you'll stay here safe, and we'll make sure you're with people who care." Kyle Jensen arrived from patrol. "Morning, champ. Place feels different today, huh?" Ethan nodded slowly, almost a smile breaking through. By afternoon, Arthur was escorted into custody, hands cuffed, but head held higher. He turned once, meeting Ethan's gaze. "I'll make it right." The precinct quieted after that. Mark stepped outside, the cold air biting his face. The storm had scrubbed the sky clear. He drew a breath deep and steady, then crouched to pat Rex's broad shoulder. The dog leaned into him, coat gleaming in the sunlight. Ethan stood nearby. "You're safe now," Mark told him. "Things will change from here." Ethan looked up. He nodded and pressed closer to Rex, burying his face in the shepherd's fur. The dog stood tall, bearing the boy's weight, a steady anchor against the cold. As the sun rose higher, the city shook off its fear. Inside that fragile dawn, a boy began to heal, a father began to reckon, and a dog stood guard. For Mark, it was enough. Not a victory sung loud, but a beginning carved quiet into the snow. A promise that even in the harshest winters, new warmth could be born.